because we go with the yellow star. In some way, the yellow color was symbolized to Jewish people. Because the color gives a life for the painting, you know?
Sometimes the clearest memories are the hardest ones to talk about.
It's not easy.
Not for Sarah Atzman.
You see, they have this uniform.
Oh, with the stripes?
Yes.
Okay.
And I took the stripe to the bride.
The Hungarian-born artist didn't even put brush to paper for the first time until she was 55 years old. Now 77, she's filled galleries with canvases, and each one hangs heavy.
And it's impossible to describe exactly what happened. And with my painting, is my hope that you will understand more.
Nazi Germany, December 1944. Sarah and her family were prisoners of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
They work very fast. They collect us in every city.
Tens of thousands of European Jews were abused, starved, and stripped of their former lives at this camp alone. Victims of the Nazi genocide of World War II, persecuted simply because of their religion.
And here is a picture from my brother.
And how horrific.
They killed my brother, he was 22 years old, in Budapest, 5 days before liberated Budapest. Only because he was a Jew. This is so sad.
Sarah witnessed death every day through the eyes of an 11-year-old.
I lost about 60 persons from my family. Between them, 60, only 60. Not 16, 60. Yeah. My father, my sister, 4 children, my brother, my sister, my grandmother, my cousins, my uncles. It's crazy. It's unbelievable.
And she was far from alone.
I celebrated my 20th birthday on the train going to Bergen-Belsen. There were no cake, no candles.
Stephen Barry arrived at Bergen-Belsen around the same time. A part of the Hungarian Army Labor Battalion, Stephen went underground early in the war to escape the Nazis. He and a comrade were captured and sent to the concentration camp, where they joined the overcrowded barracks. Belsen was a holding facility, a place where innocents were simply left to die of malnourishment and disease. With little food, no sanitation, and sparse shelter, those held captive at Belsen didn't expect to live longer than 9 months. By the time World War II would end, more than 50,000 would lose their lives there.
We was afraid because no one speak with us. Children was not person that you need to explain them something.
The bodies were piled up. Every morning we saw these carts piled up with bodies.
There was no end in sight. For both Stephen Barry and Sarah Atzman, each day was about maintaining hope for the next.
If you didn't hope, you cannot stay. If you lost your hope, you didn't stay. You hope all the time it will be a better day. I pray all the time.
Nuremberg in southern Germany, the hotbed shrine city of Nazism, was overrun by the victorious Yanks.
Slowly, the Allied forces answered. By early April, American soldiers swept through Germany, freeing the towns and the people held captive by the Nazis.
Germany's cities lie in ruins, and the hopes of
Fearing defeat by the Allies, the Germans began deporting the prisoners from Bergen-Belsen, an effort to hide the evidence of their crimes against humanity.
To get rid of thousands of people, to kill them, is not a simple job. It's a major deal.
Stephen learned the Nazis had a final solution in mind. On April 7th, camp guards forced 2,500 prisoners from Belsen to board a train, including more than 400 children. The boxcars were big enough to hold 8 horses, but the guards packed each one with more than 90 people. The victims, some so weak they could barely stand, were held up body to body by the person next to them.
I have 2 sisters that they are looking out from the train. And if I was not together with my family, we cannot survive it.
They traveled down a track through Germany. The passengers didn't know their final destination, only that they had to hold on to what little life they had left.
So we knew that the Americans and the Allied troops were closing up. And we knew that the Russians were practically in Budapest. So we knew that this whole movement eventually is going to catch up with the Germans. So we just wanted to buy time and be alive when it happens.
To have one day life more. These are my 2 sisters. Yes, yes.
Oh, wow.
To have life 1 day more, 1 hour more.
At this point, Sarah Atzman, Stephen Barry, and the thousands of others had been on the train without any food, water, or rest for 6 days. Left alone in the middle of nowhere, with no idea of what would come, all they could do was wait.
That you are sure that somebody will come. I think it cannot be that no one wants to help me.
You know, thinking back now, 65 years, it's hard to do. Camp Landing Museum was organized in
At Camp
November.
Landing in Middleburg, Frank Towers is surrounded by memories.
There is my uniform.
This is your actual uniform?
That's my actual uniform that I wore home.
At 92 years old, he volunteers at the camp's museum every week. This is his old training ground as a soldier with the 30th Infantry Division. Is it nice to look back through
Oh, it's always nice to look back and read some of these things and recall the memories of when I got them, where I got them.
The walls here are lined with stories, including Towers' own account of a day in 1945 he'll never forget.
That they were telling us about the Germans were torturing these Jews and putting them to death. It was hard for us to believe. And Utah Beach in here.
Near the end of World War II, Lieutenant Towers was stationed with the 30th in Europe, part of the American charge on D-Day. After 3 years, they had victory within their reach. The young lieutenant had seen a lot of battle, thought he'd seen the worst.
We had liberated some Allied prisoner of war camps, American prisoner of war camps, displaced persons.
But on April 13th, a small tank battalion fighting alongside his division made a startling discovery.
Then, of course, you know, then we became believers.
At the bottom of a hill near a river stood a freight train. The Nazis, knowing they were surrounded, had abandoned the Bergen-Belsen prisoners loaded inside.
We could see that they had been tortured, unfed, overworked. They were skin and bones, dirty clothes. They hadn't had baths in probably 6 months or more. They were infested with lice.
But hope had arrived.
And they came almost late, almost late.
Tank commanders George Gross and Carol Walsh, the first American soldiers to arrive at the train, captured on film the astonishment that erupted among the prisoners. Those who could stand, stood. Those who could smile, smiled. Mothers dusted off their children and presented them to greet the soldiers.
And this was hard for us to see that, because we knew these people were human beings.
As a liaison officer, Lieutenant Towers knew the roads well and could navigate through the war-torn countryside. His duty was to get the Jewish prisoners out of there.
Out of this battle zone to a place of safety, and of course to afford them food, clothing, and shelter.
They loaded the survivors into trucks and delivered them to the safety of the American military.
It's indelible in my mind, in my heart, and my soul.
Even after 65 years, Stephen can still recall the moment he knew the nightmare was over.
One of the GIs came down where we were sitting next to a little fire, and I had a German as his overcoat, and he took his penknife out and he cut that SS insignia and dropped it in the fire, and that's something that brings tears to my eyes even right now, because that was to me the end of the Nazis and the beginning of my new life.
I've never had such an impact on anybody's life before until this episode. These were actually postcards.
The importance of the mission was not lost on Frank, but for him, life moved on.
And we had to stand formation. I was just doing my job, and what I did today didn't have any bearing on what I did tomorrow.
Tucked in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York is the tiny village of Hudson Falls, a picturesque, patriotic town where an American flag flies on just about every corner, but not the first place one would think to seek out World War II history. There are fewer families living in Hudson Falls today than there were prisoners on the train near Magdeburg. And yet,
What you remember from us?
Oh, I remember a lot from you.
this is where Holocaust survivors and their liberators united once again last September.
It's unbelievable that we survived it. It is.
Finally able to share the words long left unspoken.
Well, we kind of hugged and kissed and cried. Because, you know, basically I saw him 65 years ago.
Yeah. It's still, for me, it's pretty hard to believe.
It's a miracle.
This week, our students...
It began at Hudson Falls High School in 2001. And history teacher Matt Rizal assigned his students to interview veterans of the war. Out of the project came the account of the train rescue.
Not only for allowing us to share their joyous reunion after 65 years, but also to recount to those whose lives we also celebrate, the victims of the evil of the Nazi state.
Each story is absolutely memorable. You know, there's a common thread that runs through every single one.
The American soldiers of the 30th Infantry Division.
Soon, survivors were contacting him from around the world.
So many survivors from all over the world here today.
You know, they're grandparents now, going into their 70s. I think there's definitely a feeling of wanting to know what happened to them, this traumatic events, the Holocaust, when they were a child.
The first year I was there, we had twin daughters.
Not only the survivors had questions, but the liberators too.
Yeah. I've been here twice.
I had not seen them or heard from them in all these years. They went their way, we went ours, and now fate is bringing us back together again.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the soldiers of the 30th Infantry Division and the 743rd Tank Battalion.
From Israel, Europe, and cities across America, they came to Hudson Falls for 4 days to rekindle the connection made long ago. 6 veterans and 9 survivors, spouses and children too.
We met Carol Roach 2 years ago, but everybody else is like a new face to us.